Yep. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's late. Thanks for sticking it out so far, showing up for our presentation. My name is Chris Magnus of Breakout Solutions. With me today is Bruce Gerlander from Walt Disney World Golf. We're going to talk a little bit about pricing strategy. I promise you've probably heard it, the term AI a lot today. We're going to not try to say it very often. We're going to talk about what happens before AI. So, Bruce, you want to give yourself an introduction here?
Yes, I'm not with Walt Disney World Golf. My attorney called earlier. I'm with Century Golf. I do not work for or represent the Walt Disney Company. So please remember in anything I say today. Chris said it was going to be a tough audience, last one of the day. But I told him I bet I could get someone's interest. What if I told you that I could guarantee you $100,000 of annual income for doing nothing? Basically nothing. Don't invest in anything, spend any money, and pretty much have a guaranteed repetitive revenue base coming in every month. Would anybody be interested? He was right. It's a dead crowd. Everyone's arm did not go up in that. $100,000 a year. No labor cost, no technology cost. Blew up north of We are going to get into it, and we'll stay away from the political comments for the rest of the show.
And Bruce's disclaimer is because I'm probably committing some copyright violations of the Pirates of the Caribbean, so we toned down the pirate stuff a little bit for Bruce's well-being when he goes back to Florida. So just to set the table today, like Bruce said, we're going to talk a little bit about subscription. We're going to talk a little bit about data, but we're going to cover some points that I've covered before in these presentations. At TechCon25, I did a presentation really just on the nuts and bolts of dynamic pricing, how the algorithms work. Super nerdy, super wonky, probably went over everybody's heads, my own too. But if you want to go back and look at those, they're in the NGCOA files for you guys to go review. Last winter, we had a fantastic, fun seminar with Brooks and Pat Kelly. Brooks is in the back of the room on specifically selling liquidation strategies like Players Club, like Bruce is alluding to. Another great presentation, sales tactics, loyalty, how to incent your staff, how to really kind of pull off the liquidation end of selling your inventory. And then a couple weeks ago, I was lucky enough to get up on stage with Jay Karen, John Brown, and Lee Finkel to talk, kind of, crystal ball, pricing strategies, things like that moving forward in golfing. So, having said that, today we're going to dive into a few of the controversial points from those presentations. Kind of review the state of play where we are post-COVID. Kind of sitting here, not wondering, kind of wondering where the economy is, that sort of thing. How to get back on track if you weren't on track already. And of course, we're going to make some really bad pirate jokes. So we'll get started. Kind of how I see things right now in the industry. Bruce, feel free to weigh in at any time. There's kind of three clubs out there, three kinds of clubs. First club is the one I enjoy. Early adopters of technology, dynamic pricing, looking at segmentation, things like that. They're doing well, and they're continuing to do well kind of through the wonkiness of the last year or so. Second one is interesting. They're either late to the party or don't want to come to the party and didn't really do anything, kind of let the rising tide raise all boats, right? Your atheists and your agnostics in terms of some of the stuff we're talk about today, which at the end of the day, we all bought fields where folks go out and pay us to hit rocks with sticks. So, why use technology in some cases? It's a fair point too. The third one is the really interesting one. The one that tried to take advantage of COVID, of the rising tide, but they have done it. I mean, at very advantageous pricing, kind of did away with their loyalty inventory, their memberships, their long-term customers, and really went after the high ADR, the high average rate rounds. Just blanket took up their static pricing all over the place, all day, all the time, without any real respect to the distribution of rounds or your mixes. And the third way, one that kind of sticks in my craw is you have no conversion strategy for any new customers that are coming to you from third parties, your Golf Nows, your Supreme Golfs. You know, as an employee of Supreme Golf, I want you to convert those customers into subscription programs or something else, right? Have a value equation for those guys when they come out. So you're one of those three courses in my mind. All of those three courses have a path forward. We're going to talk about where we go from here. So this is from a couple weeks ago. This is I don't know if Stuart's in here, so he probably didn't show up, but I borrowed this from Stuart's presentation at Golfing, right? This is a state of current pricing over the last 5 years in golf. We've got the CPI line that's blue, right? You see that big kind of camel hump, and then it flattens out. And then this green line is a bucket of courses that Pellucid tracks year to year on weekend pricing. So you kind of see, you know, those courses missed the boat for 3 years in terms of pricing according to CPI. And now, you know, we're kind of past the death cross here where we're asking more for the weekend greens fees than CPI is going up every year. It's kind of a tough place to be because now golf is getting more expensive relative to the basket of everything that everyone else consumes. Up until last year, believe it or not, there were 21 states where CPI grew faster than greens fees during COVID. Now you hear the stories about demand. That blows my mind that we weren't positioned in many markets to capitalize on the increased demand. So that's a tough story for me, and it's a tough story now as we're kind of going into an uncertain economy where we're still trying to catch up for where we could have taken price increases, and the rest of the economy kind of isn't there. There's another graph. So on this graph, this is a volumetric graph. I'll explain in a second. But that last graph, these two lines are here on this graph. So the Pellucid bucket is that orange line. These are 5 courses that I work with that were early adopters of dynamic pricing. We put it in 2019, 2020. So when COVID hit, they were ready to go. And these are their relative price increases relative to what that Pellucid bucket did. So you can see in some years, these are Desert Southwest courses. Disney's here in purple. These are some East Coast courses. You can see they're kind of more affected by the weather. But you can see those lines look way more like the CPI line than the rest of the bucket. And that's because they had dynamic pricing in place and were able to take advantage of pricing the inventory. The other interesting thing is what happened in 2024. There was a lot of uncertainty around the election. You know, these courses are pricing a year in advance. We're working on 2027 for almost all of them. So there was a lot of turmoil around the election. The booking window shortened tremendously. You know, back to that last chart, inflation flattened out. So, you know, we're talking about, you know, where does pricing go from here 2 weeks ago? But it's kind of already recovering as far as we can show on our 2026 pricing that's already in the books, and looking at 2027. We're already kind of moving back in the right direction again. And we had a real kind of keyhole that we had to navigate through during the uncertainty of the presidential election. So for my prepared clubs, the ones I work with, that's kind of the state of their play. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce for his thoughts. Can you give a quick description of the economics of Disney Golf and kind of where you think you are right now and your initial thoughts on dynamic pricing when we put it in a few years ago?
I can share thoughts on some golf course in Central Florida, not necessarily affiliated with any Fortune 100 companies. I was seeking dynamic pricing for like 10 years before we eventually converted over. Could never find the right one. I remember it was the year of COVID at the PGA show back in 20, where we met with various providers, and we made a corporate decision and ended up working with Pricewing, Present Pre-Swing, whatever the name was. And the one thing that scared the heck out of me, and I don't know how many of you feel the same way, but maybe we're critical as golf course operators of what your course is really worth. And it scared the heck out of me when we put the bands together. Oh, wow. We're already we're not 100% full. We're able to get some discounting here and there. And we put Pricewing in, and I said, damn, was I stupid? we had left so much money on the table, and then COVID was like just pouring gasoline on the fire. You saw just fantastic. Best thing we ever did. Has anybody thought about dynamic pricing and not done it yet? Do it. You'll never look back. It's the greatest thing in the world. What else? Anything else?
Yeah, that was, can you give us a quick sort of primer on mix at that course in Central Florida? What percentage of customers might be visiting certain house versus locals or
Sure.
subscription players?
I think we have a very complex rate card. At one point, when Chris started working with us, I think we're up to 64 rate types. But basically, we've narrowed it down to some smaller buckets. But it's your retail customer, your guest in for a few days. Then we have, can't say vacation, timeshare members of the club. And then we have some locals. And then we do operate golf courses at a facility that there's 75,000 team members that work there. So that's a pool of golfers that we can help fill in on the bottom. And then, of course, our players club that we'll talk about as well. So it covers everything from high end. And this season, we had everybody playing golf, let's say March prime season in golf, Central Florida, from $265 for a round of golf to $15 right there. And you mix it all up and it works pretty good somehow.
Yeah, it's the perfect scenario. We have a lot of different customers consuming golf for a lot of different reasons. And that's a key point to remember. Anybody from, we call them captive dads that are there with their families that would be 5 hours away from the parks, or locals, even cast members, right? That's an important mission for our partners there at the parks, is to provide a place for the cast members to enjoy themselves as well. So it's a really complex mix of characters and consumers. So we're going to talk about how we get to some of that pricing. We'll do a quick sort of wonky review of how the dynamic pricing is working, right? So we got to talk about the demand curve a little bit to get there, right? So we all know that whether or not to play your golf course is a binary decision for a golfer. He's either yes or no. He's in or not, and he's making this calculation based on all of the normal revenue management variables. He has a price in his mind, and if you match his price, he's a yes. If you don't, he's a no. And when you stack him and 10,000 of his buttons, we get a nice demand curve of where everybody has their decision points. So now is the day that your calculus teacher warned you about. If you ever sat in the bathroom and said, when in the hell am I ever going to use any of this stuff? Today's the day. Interesting things happen on this curve when you take the derivative of it. The derivative is the rate of change of this curve. And there's a theory in economics called price elasticity. It's how much your consumption changes based on how fast your pricing changes. And so this point of maximum elasticity, the place where that consumption is changing the most as the price changes, is a really important point to know in your data. Because we all have these folks up here, our cheap guys, we have the brass ringers down here, but to really maximize this space under the curve, this space under the curve is your potential revenue. If you're able to meet every customer at his decision point, all of this is revenue, but that generally doesn't happen. There's frictions for a lot of reasons. Moving this demand curve to the right is hugely key. And I'm going to show you what happened to Disney with this curve, right? This is, honestly, for my buck, this is the most important thing that's happened in golf in the last 10 years, is the ability to see this elasticity curve in first swing. It's hugely important for the way we develop strategy. But you can see this is 2020, and I just picked Magnolia and weekend rates at Magnolia because that kind of matched up with the Bruce graph I showed you earlier. When Bruce and I were having those uncomfortable discussions about what the golf course was worth, our maximum elasticity was 1.8 at $50. $50 right there, right? So that was sort of our revenue equation for a weekend morning. We had some folks out there, we were playing with the algorithm a little bit that paid 160, but for the most part, everybody's kind of in this little spot right here between, call it 40 and 75 bucks. And I remember how scared we were at $88. I don't know why that sticks in my head, but $88 was scary to us. Here's today. You can see that our maximum point of elasticity has moved from 50 to 150, so it's tripled. And an interesting thing is the maximum elasticity has almost doubled. So we're playing a very tricky game out here at the kind of pointy end of our pricing. Yes, we're getting 150, we're getting triple the rate. But if we go to 165, we lose way more golfers than we did back then if we went from 50 to 60. So that's kind of an important thing to realize is moving that inflection point right creates all of this extra space under the curve. It's all this extra potential revenue. And so to pick just one pricing point is terribly inefficient.
Just add,
Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I'm probably cutting off.
Is there a number that you start to get cautious, like for us, we try to never get past 2 to 5. For that maximum elasticity, is there a number in your head that?
Yeah, you're in the right neighborhood. 2.5 is, we always say the penalty for missing the high is 10x the penalty for missing low. So if that number is 2 or 3 or even up to 5, I'm backing off the pricing the other way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Great question. So you already sort of alluded to some of this, but now looking back, what were some of the unforeseen things that happened? Any pitfalls that we had along the way?
sure, but before that, did everyone understand all the graphs and charts? I didn't, but what he was telling me is I was not very smart, is what he was trying to get. The point he was getting across there is that the algorithm worked. But
Not smart, just inefficient.
maybe not believing in the product enough, but the customer's going to tell you what your product's worth. We can do anything we want with pricing, right? We could lower it, raise it. They tell you what it's worth. And why not put a tool in place that allows the customer to make the decision? We always talk about the right golf at the right price at the right time. Sorry, was there a question?
So between the two graphs, when you first started, what kind of increments in price and percent did you start changing to learn to get where you got to in the end? Did you start with like go to a 2% increase, a $2 or $3 or $10?
So we started immediately with a range that was 20%. The max of the range was 20% higher than the current wrap rates. And you can kind of see it almost here on this graph, right? You can see that this represents about 70% higher than what the elusive bucket was in terms of rate. So that year we grew average rate by about 28% and followed it up with a 25 and a 22. So we very quickly went from the max rate being 165. We started like 88, then we went 130. By 22, we were in the 185, 189 range, and now we're at 250.
And it went up very rapidly, but I think everyone in here understands rev par versus average rate. And we talk all the time, people get hung up on what their average rate is. And you can have a $500 peak rate, but your blended rev par is much less. So it's filling in the whole T sheet with the optimum demand at that price for what the customer is willing to pay.
Yeah, that's an important point. Your operations executives will get super excited about how can we get $300 or $400 or $500, but it's really the rev par we're looking at for available round. We're growing that instead of straight ADR.
Would you have fewer golfers? I would actually want fewer golfers and make it more money because I'm having a hard time keeping my course alive because I'm at such a high utilization.
You can do that. I mean, we went, when I arrived in 16, we had 8-minute intervals. Then we went to 9, now we're 10, we might even go more. You could also just put a reverse squeeze time in and closing time if you want to drive demand there. But then you have less widgets to sell.
We'll answer that question specifically in a couple of slides. It's a good lead.
It looks like essentially triple pricing, but what does that look like adjusted for inflation?
So adjusted to inflation, we'll go back to this graph, right? So blue is inflation, and Disney is purple, right? So we were actually under inflation the first 6 months to a year of installation, and then we jumped to many multiples of the CPI. The worst we did was here, where we were 11% over a 3%, and now we're back to sort of a 9% over 3% CPI.
Well, another way to answer that, without getting specific, since COVID, Green Tree golfing revenue is up over 20% every year. I know CPI, it's been inflationary, but not at that level. So between a combination of dynamic pricing and the subscription price, that's how the graph took the shape it did. So
Yeah.
you can certainly outpace inflation with dynamic price.
These are a few very good outliers, but it's not uncommon to get 8 to 14% in the first couple of years of dynamic pricing over CPI. Okay, back to, any other
Pitfalls,
thoughts on
probably-
what we're going into next year?
Well, just the one comment before that, I was the biggest impediment, even though I wanted this tool when I got there. Again, it scared a little bit of the topic. The one pitfall, honestly, was just changing the staff's mindset. They all like to look at a rate card, say it's $82 at this time, and so forth, because we flex everything off of our rack rate. So all those other sub buckets all fluctuate based upon the algorithm. So it's a little tougher. They don't have a rate card to look at. And training your staff how to communicate that in a positive manner to the guest was probably the biggest thing.
Crossing this make price proposals, how often do you intervene manually?
Hardly ever.
So it's an interesting question. I have directors of golf who want to intervene all the time.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get them to take the hands off because their first challenge to me is, hey, you're not at the course every day. You're not looking at the greens. You're not doing this, doing that. But I counter with, you're not in everybody's houses looking at your rates, right? So there's definitely an education amongst your directors of golf. There's a scripting that needs to happen with your pro shop guys on how to book and how to talk to people over the phone to explain this. And we go over some of that in some of those other presentations.
We had a large group cancel a couple months back, and we left it like a 2-day gap, so you can go in and adjust for that. And thoughts on pricing strategy? I have no idea. Well, what happened today? We're talking about anybody in Venezuela losing today? I don't know. Well, what's going on? It's crazy right now, and I was born paranoid, and I get worse by the day, worrying about what's going to happen.
The nice thing too about dynamics is you're not picking one price, you're not putting your finger in there and trying to nail it on the button, right? For this year, a lot of my clubs, we're not going after more max rate, we're lifting the minimums, right? We're playing with the mix and trying to get more out of our sort of mid-tier group pricing and things like that. So it makes that pricing conversation a little bit easier.
Just you raised one, I love that word. Is anyone familiar or use the word mix or understand it? It's different rate types. It's from your rack rate to your bottom rate, what mix of rounds go into your bucket. Most people don't realize, but you can often raise your RevPAR by reducing your top rate. Sounds counterintuitive, but I don't know if everyone understands it. I'm getting some blank faces, so some people don't understand. So you can reduce your top rate, but still bring up your overall revenue because more people are going to play, albeit at a lower rate. Kind of the counterintuitive.
It's drawing the squares that you're not doing. Was there a question?
Yeah, about the pricing and the algorithms that you have listed. What kind of algorithms you're looking at? Demand supply, of course. You look at weather, you look at the supply, you look at the.
Yes. So what we're doing is we're looking at weather adjusted inventory. We have an algorithm that kind of looks at the overall weather, builds your T sheet into what the weather is, so that we have a weather normalized capacity that serves as the inventory. And then we're looking at high temperature, low temperature, probability of precipitation 48 hours out. That all goes into the weather component. And then everything else is consumption data. It's anonymized consumption data. So we're not going out and crawling other people's websites. We're looking at our own papers, and it's anonymized. So I know there's a few states kind of looking at dynamic pricing rules right now, but none of what we do falls foul of that.
So you don't look at the concept.
We never look at a comp set. It's our RevPAR. We're making more money if our RevPAR goes up. I use the analogy of going into the SAT and planning to cheat. You're going to cheat off of, right? Somebody smart, somebody not, you don't know. So we kind of see our competitors that way. We don't know if they're always up on things or not. So that's kind of that's how we look at it.
If you're working out your rack rate, dynamic pricing, what sets the ceiling? How high does it go? Is that something that does, or that's something?
So once you're into the dynamic world, you're kind of old. Your old static pricing is more of a reference point. But I'll go back to this graph, the maximum elasticity point on this curve. That's where I'm getting starting to get a little uncomfortable. I'm kind of looking at that as to be the middle of my band. I might take 10 or 20% more if I have a nice long tail of folks who want to pay more. But the steeper that gets, the less of this tail I'm trying to capture.
But practical, you have the reference rate, you're targeting $100, and you can set the base and the top, move that up and down as much as you want. And then let the system figure out which way it's gonna come in.
That's the pricing, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, we're using pre-swing.
So let's just say, for example, our rack rate's $100. When we first started, I think we were like from 90 to 120, something like that, for example. And then as it was starting to grow, maybe it became 95 to 130.
That's one of the things we're struggling with, we have price swing tuning. Do you do it by feeling, or you say, okay, well, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if I say 2 to 4, my reference rate is, let's say, 60. I feel like 40 to 75. Why are we injecting feelings into it when it's all otherwise?
Exactly. And that goes back to this gentleman's question about staying out of the manual kind of nature of trying to adjust it back and forth. We get very comfortable with a large range of rates that we're willing to accept, and then we let the algorithm make the decisions from there. And if you know, in pre-swing, you can optimize the algorithm based on fill, on occupancy, or by top rate. So in instances where I am maybe a little more nervous or I don't have a great feeling about the rates I have in there, I'll use that secondary band, right? So on those 7 days out, I have this huge bump because that's when the T-sheet opens. I keep the rates artificially high for the first 8, 10, 12 hours. Then I move into a second band that's wider based on the reservation.
We did, though, increase the top as we saw success. And you're selling out even at the high end, just raise the band up or let it run. So you can't go blind, right? It's just not set. You're always going to have to adjust to how they're operating within those bands.
All right, so let's great questions, by the way. Thanks. This is the best audience I've had in a very long time with questions. So please feel free to keep them coming. So what's with the pirate analogy, right? The problem is, if we're using the T-sheet sort of as your treasure map, that treasure is buried in an ocean of data that you're collecting and may not even know how to access. That's the big problem here is our GMS systems have a ton of data in them, and the reporting systems aren't necessarily always the best from operator, from vendor to vendor. You may not even know how to run certain reports to get some of the data that helps you in these decisions. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to organize the data so you're prepared to implement these strategies first, right? So obviously in our analogy here, Davey Joe's got T-sheets, right? But it's not the treasure map you think of normally in this industry where you're looking at the fill and you're kind of doing the old style T-sheet review. A lot of the data is coming into your GMS on its own, right? So all of the transaction data that we're talking about here comes in automatically. It's players, dates, and times, and rates. And so it's just sort of a giant mess unless you're really getting in there and running the reports and making sure that the number one job of your pro shop manager is to connect that transactional data to every customer on your key sheet. Nothing makes me sicker than when I look at one of my clubs and I see Smith, guest across the sheet. Barf. I can't stand it because there's a 25% data collection rate. I don't know how often those other guys are coming. I don't know if they always play with Smith or don't. I can't do anything with 75% of that data. So establishing the play patterns and kind of selling down your funnel, we were talking about conversion strategies earlier, it's so important. You can't do it unless your pro shop guys are collecting data. So if you have to use AI to answer phones, it's not my favorite solution, but if you have to use AI to answer phones to increase your data capture rate, do it. That's the most important thing your pro shop has to do. So, this is the one time I'm going to mention AI today. It's not rescuing you from that bad data collection, right? The baseline of all this stuff that everyone's talking about today is data collection, organization, and access, right? AI is an accelerator, it's a gas pedal. Right? It's throwing gasoline on a fire. And if you have a dumpster fire, it's going to accelerate your dumpster fire. I hate to say it, it's not coming to help you if you don't have these very basic data organization systems in place at your place. So back to your question about less golfers. really, if you're in a static situation, you kind of got to pick a price point, right? And if you want less golfers, you can move your price point out, pick a more expensive rate. Really, what you're looking at is underneath that curve. We talked about again that point of maximum price elasticity is drawing the biggest box you can with one rate. So of all of this potential revenue at this one static point, I'm picking on Bruce again, but like $50, this is all the revenue he's going to get, right? He doesn't want to serve all these guys because they're cheap, and these guys are looking for a better experience. So we're not getting those guys, we're not getting these guys, we're just kind of getting this box underneath the curve. And we can move that out. Say we move it out to $100. Maybe the box is smaller, maybe it's not, right? So we're just kind of stuck with our decision if we're in that kind of static universe. This is where we want to be. This is segmentation. Sorry. This is segmentation based on what Bruce was talking about earlier on the mix. If we can meet more consumers on this curve at their price point, whether they want the premium experience down here, where we're giving them a fancy card and all-inclusive access to beverages or things like that, or they're our annual customer up here who's done the math and we kind of need this money to get through the winter, so it's all pass, or any of these kind of dynamic spots down here, you can see we're covering way more of our potential revenue and missing fewer spots. Of course, there's always friction, but by being able to have multiple price points and serving multiple customers at sort of their value equation, you maximize that space under the curve. So I know that was a lot of math real fast, but if I were just to tell you what to do, this is it. Right? Your pricing and your conversion strategies have to increase utilization. We talked about RevPAR being the most important number on your T sheet with respect to average rate plans. You bring up RevPAR by increasing utilization. We're back to kind of normal economics where raising price isn't going to also raise your rounds, right? COVID's over. You can see it Monday to Thursday in a lot of markets. We're starting to go the other way on rounds. If you want to service those rounds, you need to come up with abilities to steal wallet share from our competitors.
The one thing too with that is it's hard to use dynamic pricing or drive overall revenue if you don't have demand. If you have 50% demand for your product, it's hard to raise the top on the price. So you have to fill all those variety of buckets in order to be able to lift the prices when you have that.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Occupancy creates your price control. If your T sheet is 40% full, the customer owns you. I'm sorry to say, but the customer owns you. He has a lot of choices, and you're having to compete on a much larger playing field than if your T sheet is full and you can move the rates all the way out to that kind of the end of that elasticity curve and capitalize sort of on those last couple of customers that need to golf and you can charge a premium too. Now, notice I'm not telling you to compete on price alone. Absolutely not. We're not. That's a downward spot. Do not go on your third parties. Don't go on Golf Now. Don't go on Supreme and throw low rates out there and do the downward spiral. We're looking at value, price to value, and all of those different customers have different value equations. So we're not telling you to discount on third parties to just bring in random customers that you're maybe not going to convert. Drive the value equation. Yeah.
How do you, I mean, so I'm sitting back here, I'm on a local public golf course. I would say the person who may name most that runs a golf course somewhere is more resort, transient, less additional. We pushed hard on dynamic and we felt like it hurt us in the long run because of the local market got some pricing fatigue.
Sure.
How do you think about everything you said? Is there anything you can share that's slightly different in how you would present this if you were talking about a course that is more relational and less visual?
Absolutely. Great leading question. We're going to talk about it here. 4 levers to consider. We'll start with yours. Number 3, product configuration. Not every product needs to be dynamically priced. I personally have made the decision on dynamically pricing many things I should not have. Number 1, seniors. Seniors get it. sucks. It was a terrible mistake on me trying to dynamically price senior rates. The other one is Players Club, EVP, subscription services. Don't dynamically price those, right? There's a price for knowing the price. The other interesting one that I would point to you, Brooks, is the loyalty card. Lots of local folks that play all the time. You know, if they're playing 8, 10, 12 times a year, they shouldn't notice that the price is moving up and down, right? They should join your loyalty program where you've kind of taken the premiums that you ordinarily might through dynamic pricing, price a loyalty card, and then have them pay staff for all year. Yeah, so that's one way. That's one way to skin the cat. And you can take the premium all up front, right? And so then your dynamic pricing is kind of left to the guy. And honestly, if you look at your quintile reports and your T-sheets, half of your customers are visiting you through like once every 3 months or less. So they shouldn't really be coming out enough to notice that the price is changing. Yes.
So how is it different? Are you talking about doing a pricing strategy first and then this is the executional part of it? Because I get what you're saying about how your competition in your market kind of informs what your pricing should be, where your bullseye is, and then allow that on pricing to hover between the high end and low end. Is that right?
That's correct. Half correct. I don't necessarily look at my individual competitors. I'm not pulling a CMA necessarily. I'm looking at my RevPAR. Increasing my RevPAR is the target, and I'm looking at all those different mix types and saying, okay, how many percentage of this guy do I need? How much of a percentage of this guy do I need? How much of a percentage of rack do I need to lift that RevPAR 3 points a year, 4 points a year, whatever it happens to be, throughout the T-sheet, right? Not just in the apex hours in the morning, but you know, developing liquidation strategies like Players Club in the afternoon where my RevPAR is 0. Yeah.
Just a follow-up on that. Are those buckets, when you look at the curve and the different buckets there, is the top part of that more or less elastic than the bottom?
So you start out very inelastic, right? Everybody wants to have golf for free, right? Everybody wants to have golf for $10. Everybody wants to have golf for $20. Then you start losing people. Some of your low-income seniors, that sort of thing, you start losing people out there. And then the 3 or 4 knuckleheads that are going to pay you 3 or 4x your average rate, those guys are inelastic too. But in the middle, that's a thing that's been said in this industry, that golf demand is inelastic the whole way across the board. But I beg to differ, it's not. Right? There are many in between kind of those two extremes. There's a ton of variability here. Yes.
So just looking at this graph, I think I have this graph look at a lot and sort of things. In the middle, you said it's where the max elastic is.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
I think I struggle, and obviously up there. But your stuff is there. I struggle to know where the middle is because it doesn't pinpoint it. Like yours, like you have your extra.
So if you're using, are you using Frisco?
Yeah.
Okay, so it will tell you up here what your maximum elasticity is and where it is. So I don't know if you ever have seen this, but it will tell you for whatever day part mix you're looking at, it'll say, okay, the max is 1.8 at $50. And then it'll break it out further to explain, hey, if you go up 10%, you could lose 20% of your customers, whatever it happens to be. Sorry? This does. Yeah. Actually, all of the clubs that I use, card fee goes into this. So we have a complete picture, at least of the golf course spend. We'll go to other systems and look at SPV and things like that, enhanced player spend, which is probably a completely separate presentation. But yeah, this is just briefing card fee. So the other way is changing, and this goes back to your question. Changing the basis on which you price, right? Looking inward at your own consumption data, your own RevPAR, and mapping your own value equation. One of the companies I work with doing a ton of journey that, they kind of understanding the complete customer experience, the CX from start to finish, and looking inward at how you can raise RevPAR instead of sticking up your finger, hey, this neighbor's 50 and he's worse, and this neighbor's 100, he's better, so I'm 75. Looking at that data, as well as Erica's presentation earlier, she mentioned Net Promoter Scores, NPS. NPS is a huge guardrail for me in terms of the max rate. if I see that demand is decreasing and we know that course conditions and everything else about the experience is remaining the same, that is a huge indicator to me that there's pricing fatigue and that I need to come up with something different or lower the max demand. Inventory allocation, we have all those price points for all those different customers, and you have to understand how much inventory you want to give them, right? How much, when on the T-sheet you want to give them the access, right? If you have an annual pass holder whose ADR is $10, you want to give them like a 3-day window, right? You want him to be a liquidator. Your max ADR guys, they have all year, right? So managing not only the duration of the reservation windows, but how much of the inventory you provide their channel to maximize your mix. Bruce, how do you guys look at segmentation for it?
And when you say look at segmentation of the different buckets, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to fill them all up. Again, we don't have a day that we're going to fill up the T-sheet with $250 a week. We can't stay in business if we fill it up with $15 late fee. So you got to maximize each one. And as we said earlier, if you don't have a full T-sheet, it's hard to use dynamic pricing. It's hard to maximize your revenue. So you have to get full first and make sure that you're maximizing those. Then you have smart people like Chris helping you and guiding you through the process.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point. You kind of have to navigate the rules in which you have, right? Our landlord leads us to 1,000 Players Club members here. So we know that they're going to consume X 3 days in advance. And we know that we have to monitor what Disney does to fill the parks, because if they start offering, multi-day deals to locals, or, kind of using the blackout dates to the pass holders, then we're going to have a different person in the parks that's maybe not going to spend on golf. So we just have to kind of be constantly monitoring those things and play within the parameters we have. Question?
Question. With the game system, can you make a reservation 30 days out, see, watch the rate drop, cancel it?
You can. It generally, with our pricing strategies, doesn't work a ton. If you were to do that as a member, you would catch that pretty quickly. We monitor and audit that. Suspend membership. Even a place like PGA West, we suspend members for doing that kind of thing. But on the pricing, on the public pricing algorithm, it's U-shaped, just kind of like the airports are. So it would be very uncommon for somebody to book, say, in the 30 to 45 day window and have the price go down from the months. But you theoretically you could. It doesn't happen very often in vitro. That was it. Any other questions? We're right on time. Just got the 2 minute warning from Taylor, so yes.
Yeah, I'm from Australia. It's pretty common that they don't advise. So topics will be up in the next 2 months out. Has anyone actually ever gone to Skype and been thought about pricing once the cancellation window is closed? What I mean by that is, like, we have a 48-hour policy. We do find 3 days out of it. They said a weather forecast or they want to change. So we haven't released any up and down pricing in that period. I'm wondering, when you get in the hotspot, particularly in the holiday destination, there's obviously 48 hours from the next day. Has anyone brought in those new dynamic pricing after the cancellation period is ended, or 2 or 3 days ago?
Yes, I usually layer my strategies throughout the reservation window, so I have a specific strategy for inside of 2 or 3 days that deals with sort of the cancellation loads and things like that. My clubs deal with the no call, no show problem by overdemand, right? So our effective intervals are different than the actual intervals on the T-sheet, because we know we get 4 to 6% cancellation. So we kind of overbook the T-sheet by 4 to 6%, if that makes sense. And so we take that into account, and we just kind of expect that on a poor weather day or something like that, we're just going to get cancellations. Kind of the algorithm will adjust based on that pacing kind of in real time. The algorithm's looking at the pace to the prior 3 or 4 years every 15 minutes, so it's moving pretty fast.
You're not very kind.
This is it's very uncommon now. here anyway. All right, I'm gonna get to the signal to cut it off.